Today we're going to look at SportsVision from a different perspective, from the eye and brain anatomy of things. Hello, I'm Dr. Laby. I'm a SportsVision ophthalmologist with 30 years of experience taking care of elite and professional athletes. This channel is devoted to you, the athlete, to help you gain an advantage and perform at your best. We've talked about the SportsVision pyramid in the past. We've talked about the shape of the pyramid, the bottom level being how each eye sees by itself, the next level of how the two eyes work together, the next level up from that, how we use the visual information to make a decision, and then the level above that, how that visual information with the decision is used to make a motor action for success on the court or on the field, and so forth. If that goes all well, we get to the top of the pyramid, which is optimal performance. We've learned that in order to get to the top of the pyramid, each of the levels below has to be optimal and functioning at its best. Today, we're going to look at it from a different perspective. Instead of the idea of a pyramid, we're going to actually look at the anatomy and the physiology of how the eyes and the brain work together to allow that pyramid to be effective and to allow you to perform optimally in your sport. As you can see from this short animation, visual information enters the eye, the signal passes through the optic nerves to the back part of the head, the occipital cortex area where the visual system processes information. Then the signal moves forward, both in the top part as well as in the lower parts of the brain, to cause the decision making and the motor action to be effective. Let's start off with the obvious. Let's start off with the eye. And let's look at the most important focusing portion of the eye. That part is actually the tears, the layer of liquid on the surface of our eye. Our eyes are always lubricated, they're always wet, and in fact if they become dry, not only can that be uncomfortable, but that can really affect your vision. Let's understand how that happens. In order to understand, let's think about the tears, the liquid themselves. In fact, tears aren't just water. Tears are made up of three different components. There's an oil layer, and that oil layer is important. That's on the outside, and that prevents evaporation of the tears. Obviously, we don't want our water to evaporate quickly. The biggest layer, the thickest layer in the middle is actually the water layer, the tear layer. And then we have, closest to the eye, a mucus layer. Mucus you think about as from your nose, but in fact this is something that's very important. That mucus layer allows the tears to stick to the eye and to keep it lubricated. In fact, if the eye is properly and evenly lubricated, you'll have maximal vision. Well, if you think you might have a dry eye, or you might have changes in vision due to dryness, then you really need to see a sports vision specialist in order to diagnose the condition and put together a treatment. Having a dry eye will impact your vision without a doubt. For the next part of the visual signal going back to the brain, we're going to use this image that you see on my side of the brain itself. You can see the brain is made up of many sections, and each of those sections has a role to play in visual performance. In addition to what we saw previously, where the visual signal went from the eye all the way back to the visual cortex, the occipital lobe part of the brain, there's other pathways where visual information proceeds. As you can see from this image, there is pathways that go to the gaze centers in the lower parts of the brain, then move forward to the frontal lobe parts of the brain that control eye movements. You can imagine that where your eyes are directed, what your eyes are looking at, is a critical part to performance in sports. If you're not looking at your target, you're going to have trouble knowing what to do. Additionally, there are other fibers that go to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is located under this area, and that's an area that's important for decision making and coordinating the motor action in your sport. Additionally, other fibers go to the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe is lower down, and the temporal lobe is an important area that makes decisions based on memory, based on identification. If you remember earlier, we had two pathways that left the back of the head and went forward in the animation. One of those pathways went to the parietal lobe area, and the other pathway went to the temporal lobe area to allow for identification of what the target is, that's from the temporal lobe, and where it is and how it's moving, that's coming from the parietal lobe. Both are important to identify the target, know where it is if you're going to make a good action in your sport for success. As you can tell, this system is pretty complex. The truth is that all the brain is used all the time, but there's certain areas that are more important in terms of sports vision and visual functioning and processing than others, and those are the areas we just spoke about now. It's important to have a general idea of how the visual system works because the evaluations and the training that you do is going to be targeted to each of those areas depending on how you perform to start. We have ways to test and to train each of these areas, and remember that it's not a one-size-fits-all program. Depending on how you do in certain areas of your brain, you may need more training in those areas, and maybe in some areas you're doing really well and you don't need any training in those areas. It has to be specifically designed for you to maximize your time, your effort, and have the maximum benefit to make the entire brain system work as efficiently and as optimally as possible for you to win. To learn more information about those areas of training, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and to look at some of the other videos we have below that we've already created that talk about each of those areas individually. Looking forward to seeing you on the next video, and good luck in your training.